My name is Alicia and I had known my son's best friend, David, since he was a child. Over the years, I watched him grow into a confident young man, always polite and kind when he visited. But recently I noticed something changing between us, something subtle yet undeniable. His gaze lingered just a little longer, and the conversations between us seemed to carry an undercurrent of unspoken words. But before I continue my story, kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel, turn on the notification bell and click on all, as I bring different love stories to your screen every day. It was a warm summer evening when it all began. My son Mark had gone on a weekend trip, leaving alone in the house. I hadn't expected David to stop by, but when he did, I welcomed him in, offering him a drink and conversation. The atmosphere felt unusually charged, though neither of them acknowledged it out loud. David had always been easy to talk to, and tonight was no different. We sat on the porch talking about life, our dreams, and even our fears. As the evening grew darker, I found myself strangely comfortable in his presence, the line between friendship and something more beginning to blur in my mind. I couldn't help but notice the way David looked at me that evening, his eyes full of something she couldn't quite place. I felt a rush of emotions, confusion, curiosity, and a flicker of attraction she hadn't expected. I quickly brushed it off, reminding myself that he was just my son's friend. But my mind continued to wander, wondering what had changed between us. As we sat in the dim light of the porch, the conversation slowed, leaving a comfortable silence. David's gaze lingered on me a little too long and I felt my pulse quicken. I could feel the tension building, but neither of us seemed willing to address it. It was as though we were both waiting for the other to make a move or say something that would break the delicate balance. David broke the silence first, his voice lower than usual. "You know, Linda, I've always admired you. You're different from anyone I've ever met." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I felt my heart skip a beat, unsure how to respond. I hadn't expected him to say something so personal, but it was clear that the dynamic between us had shifted. I tried to laugh off the compliment, but the intensity in David's eyes told me that this was no casual conversation. "David, you've known me forever. I'm like a second mom to you," I said, attempting to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But even as I spoke, I couldn't ignore the way my body reacted to the closeness between us. David's expression softened, but his eyes never left hers. "You're not just Mark's mom to me, you're something more." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I felt torn between the undeniable attraction I was feeling and the boundaries I knew I shouldn't cross. But there was something about the way he spoke, the way he looked at me, that made it hard to resist. Before I could respond, David stood up and took a step closer to me. He wasn't the shy boy she remembered anymore. He was a man, confident and sure of himself. "I felt this way for a long time," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. My breath caught in my throat as I realized how deeply these feelings ran for him. I stood too, my mind racing with conflicting emotions. I wanted to pull away, to remind him that this wasn't right. But I also couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. The tension between them was electric, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire world had disappeared, leaving just the two of us standing there. I hesitated for a moment longer before finally speaking. "David, this isn't. We can't do this. You're my son's best friend." But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure I believed them. The attraction between us was undeniable, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could resist it. David didn't move, his eyes locked on me. "I know it's complicated, but I can't pretend I don't feel this way anymore." His words were filled with sincerity. I had spent so long denying my own needs, focusing on being a mother, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted by someone. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I knew that if I didn't stop this now, things would go too far. But there was a part of me that didn't want to stop, that wanted to see where this connection with David would lead. "Maybe we should sit down and talk about this," I suggested, my voice shaky. David nodded, but instead of sitting back on the porch, he stepped even closer, closing the distance between us. "We don't have to talk if you don't want to," he said softly, his eyes searching for permission. My heart raced as I realized how close we were to crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. For a brief moment, I considered pulling away, ending the night before anything could happen. But then David reached out and gently touched my hand, sending a wave of warmth through my body. It had been so long since I felt a connection like this, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to walk away from it. I looked down at David's hand resting lightly on hers. The simplicity of the gesture felt more intimate than I had expected. My mind was flooded with reasons why I should stop this, but my body seemed to betray me, drawn toward the warmth of his touch. I felt a flutter in my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. David's hand tightened slightly as if he was testing whether I would pull away. When I didn't, he took a step closer, his voice soft but filled with emotion. "I've wanted to tell you for so long, but I never knew how," he said, his breath brushing against my cheek. I could feel the heat between them intensify, and the moment hung in the air, fragile yet full of possibility. My heart raced and I knew I was at a crossroads. I could pull away, end this before it went any further, or I could allow myself to give in to what I had been denying. My lips parted and for a moment I was unsure of what to say. The air around us felt thick with tension, and I could sense that we were waiting for the other to make the next move. My voice was barely above a whisper when I finally spoke. "David, it feels so wrong, but..." I didn't finish her sentence because I wasn't sure what I was trying to say. Was I asking for permission to stop? Or was I admitting to myself that part of me wanted to see where this would lead? The ambiguity of my words left everything in limbo. David didn't answer with words. Instead, he gently cupped my face with one hand, his thumb grazing my cheek. The touch sent shivers down my spine and my breath hitched. I felt the last of my resolve slipping away, and for the first time I allowed myself to acknowledge that this wasn't just about him. It was about me, about the way he made me feel alive again. We crossed this line, there would be no going back. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized how much I craved the connection, the closeness I had been missing for so long. I had spent years putting everyone else first, and now for the first time I was considering what she wanted. David's lips hovered just inches from mine, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. "We shouldn't," I whispered, but the words felt hollow. I knew that I was already too far gone, that the pull between us was too strong to resist any longer. David didn't respond, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. I closed my eyes, my breath shaky as I allowed myself to surrender to the moment. I felt David's lips brush against mine, soft and tentative at first, as if he was still giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't. Instead, I kissed him back, my body betraying the logic that had been screaming at me to stop. The kiss deepened and I felt myself being pulled into a whirlwind of emotions. It was as though all of the years of loneliness, of denying my own desires, had come rushing to the surface. I clung to him not just because of the attraction but because of the way he made me feel, seen, desired, and wanted in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. We pulled apart for a moment, breathing heavily, the intensity of the moment hanging in the air between us. David's eyes were filled with a mixture of longing and uncertainty, and I realized that despite his confidence, he was just as unsure as I was about what this meant. I reached up and touched his face, my thumb gently tracing his jawline. "This is crazy," I whispered, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. I never imagined this would happen. My heart was still racing, but for the first time that evening I felt a sense of calm. The decision had been made, and now, all that was left was to navigate the consequences. David smiled back, his hand still resting on my waist. "I didn't either," he admitted. "But I can't pretend I don't feel this way anymore. I've been drawn to you for so long, I just didn't know how to tell you." His voice was filled with sincerity and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. We stood there for a moment, we were processing what had just happened. The world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us in the quiet night. I knew that things would never be the same between us, but in that moment I wasn't sure I cared. All I could think about was the way David made me feel, alive, desired, and seen. As the night wore on, we sat back down on the porch, talking in hushed tones about what had happened and what it meant for the future. I knew that we couldn't continue down this path without consequences, but for now, I allowed myself to enjoy the moment. I had spent so long putting my own desires aside that I felt almost liberated by the fact that I had allowed myself to feel again. As the stars twinkled above us, I realized that I had a choice to make. I could try to go back to the way things were before, pretending that nothing had changed, or I could explore this new connection with David, knowing that it would complicate everything. But in that moment, as we sat together in the quiet of the night, I decided to enjoy the present, leaving the future for another day.